Why is it that when something goes wrong, it's easier to blame God than to look at our own choices? Maybe because it's more comfortable to shift the pain than to face it. It's as if we're trying to find someone outside ourselves to blame, so we don't have to confront what's happening within. But what if the answer isn't above us, or around us, or in someone else, but inside? At what point did we stop taking responsibility for the seeds we've planted? The tension between grace and responsibility is quiet but constant. Believing that God is loving while also witnessing the pain in the world can be deeply confusing. We ask, if He is so good, why did this happen to me? But often we forget that God never exempted us from facing the consequences of the very freedom He gave us, and that's where wisdom lives. In the kind of freedom that requires care. If you've ever felt wronged by life, if you've ever thought God was silent in the middle of your suffering, then maybe this reflection is meant for you. Not everything that hurts us comes from the outside, and evil is not always sent. Sometimes it's simply allowed so we can grow. Grace isn't a magic trick that spares us from pain. It's a presence that strengthens us to walk through what's ours to face. And maybe that's why grace demands so much awareness. Some people think God's grace is like a blanket that covers everything, our flaws, our avoidance, our repeated mistakes. But grace is not omission, nor is it an excuse to remain in error. It doesn't fix life for us. It lights the path so we can take the next step. The problem is many expect grace to be an external miracle, when it was designed to work from within. And when misunderstood, grace becomes complacency. True grace is a nudge. It's like a breeze that gently reminds you. You can choose differently. It won't carry you all the way, but it will strengthen you to walk, even with wounded feet. It's a quiet force that whispers, you can do this even if you're afraid. And when you realize that, you'll see that grace is the greatest proof that God respects your freedom. Because grace guides, but never forces. Grace empowers us, but never controls us. It's available, present, abundant, but it must be received with awareness. Receiving grace is like opening a window in a dark room. The light comes in, but you still have to clean up the mess. Many confuse blessing with comfort, but true grace can hurt because it calls us to responsibility. And maybe that's exactly why it's so powerful, because it transforms. It's curious how we can deeply desire to do good and still end up causing pain. Sometimes it's not out of malice, but out of haste, pride, or simply the refusal to listen. The freedom we receive from God is a precious gift, but without awareness it becomes a weapon in the hands of those who don't know how to use it. How many relationships break, not because love is missing, but because care is. The truth is, good intentions don't erase bad consequences. Freedom demands presence. When you speak without thinking, react without reflecting, decide without pausing, you misuse what was meant to be sacred. A moment of anger in traffic, a harsh word in a conversation, a quick decision driven by anxiety. These are all signs that freedom without awareness betrays us, because freedom without roots in goodness tends to bloom in the ego, and the ego never thinks of others. Freedom without awareness turns into destruction. That's why spirituality doesn't call us to perfection, but to responsibility. Yes, you are free, but that freedom carries the gentle weight of maturity. With every decision, you're either building or tearing something down, in yourself and in others. God loves us so deeply that He doesn't interfere in our choices, but He walks with us even when we fail, waiting for that sacred moment when we finally choose, out of love, to do what's right. You can't heal what you pretend doesn't exist. Ignored pain doesn't disappear. It simply moves, hides, and keeps hurting you from within. Self-awareness isn't a luxury for people with time. It's an urgency for anyone who wants to live lightly. Knowing yourself isn't about constant self-judgment. It's about observing yourself with love and honesty. It's removing the mask, unafraid of what you might see in the mirror. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be honest, looking at your impulses, your wounds, your patterns. That's the first step to breaking the cycle of repeated falls. It's no use praying for a new life if you insist on dragging around old habits. And this isn't solved in a day. It's a process of deep listening, inner silence, and the courage to name what hurts. because only those who face their own soul can truly heal. You can't defeat what you don't have the courage to face. Self-knowledge is a light that reveals, and sometimes what it shows isn't pretty, but it's real. And the real always has more power to transform than any fantasy of perfection. Start small. Ask yourself questions. Write, pray, listen to your feelings. God doesn't operate in falsehood. He dwells in the place where truth begins. Many people confuse forgiveness with weakness. They think forgiving means pretending the wrong never happened, but that's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness isn't brushing injustice under the rug. It's breaking the chain that keeps you tied to it. As long as you hold on to resentment, the offense remains alive inside you, even if the other person has already moved on. Forgiveness is a quiet, intimate act that takes place in the sacred space of your soul. It doesn't depend on an apology, or even reconciliation. Sometimes forgiveness comes with distance, because love also means knowing how to protect yourself. It's choosing to remember without pain, to remember without falling apart. True forgiveness doesn't erase memory. It heals the wound the memory once carried. Forgiving isn't forgetting. It's remembering without pain. And that doesn't happen overnight. It's a daily decision, a repeated choice to stop feeding the bitterness. When you forgive, you are the one set free, not because the other deserves it, but because you deserve peace, and God doesn't want you chained to your past. He wants you light, whole, and ready for what's new. In times of constant exposure, it's easy to lose yourself in the pursuit of acceptance. The issue isn't posting, sharing, or showing. The issue arises when the need to be seen becomes more important than the need to be authentic. Without realizing it, we begin to live for the eyes of others, and forget the gaze of God, which is quiet, but constant. Have you ever stopped to ask how many decisions you've made just to please others? Digital vanity is subtle. It wears good intentions as a disguise, often masking emotional emptiness behind a beautiful filter. Doing good only when there's an audience isn't kindness, it's performance. And when the soul becomes a stage, the heart starts rehearsing instead of feeling. Spirituality calls for genuine presence, not applause. And God isn't impressed by likes, He cares about sincerity. If goodness needs to be filmed, maybe it's not as pure as it looks. That's not a criticism. It's an invitation. An invitation to revisit your motives, to practice silence after action, to remember that some gestures only carry meaning when no one's watching. The soul grows in anonymity. And the most powerful kind of goodness is born from love, not from the desire to be seen. Everything you consume becomes part of who you are. The conversations you feed, the content you watch, the thoughts you repeat. All of it builds, silently, the world within you. If your mind is a garden, what have you been planting in it? Sometimes the root of anxiety doesn't come from what happened to you, but from what you keep allowing in. Practical spirituality begins in the small details. In the choice to listen to a calming song instead of one that agitates you. In the silence you allow before sleep. In the pause to breathe before reacting. In the decision not to comment just out of impulse. The biggest spiritual transformations often start in the smallest actions, because what shapes your inner world is what you nurture every day. You become what you feed, inside and out. And this applies to your body, your mind, and your spirit. Choose what brings you closer to peace, love, and truth. It's not about a radical change. It's about a gentle shift in direction, which, over time, transforms the entire landscape of your life. Because the one who chooses what to look at also chooses how to feel. It's easier to blame fate than to admit we made the wrong choices. Saying it was God's will is, many times, just a way to avoid taking responsibility. But was it really God's will? Or did we simply not pay attention to the signs? God speaks. And sometimes His silence is just the echo of our unconscious choices bouncing back. Yes, some pain comes from the outside. That's true. But some wounds are of our own making, created by distraction, repetition, and neglect. When we ignore what we feel, when we stay in toxic relationships, when we pretend not to see what is already clear, we plant seeds that sooner or later will demand a harvest. Spiritual life doesn't erase consequences. It matures us to face them with clarity and humility. What if your pain is also the result of your unconscious choices? That question isn't an accusation, it's an invitation. An invitation to grow, to take the wheel, to stop living as a victim of your own story. Spiritual maturity begins the moment we stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start reflecting, "What can I learn from this and who do I choose to become now?" Grace is available. It has always been. But it needs space within us to truly work. It's not enough to ask. We must allow. And allowing requires letting go. It requires looking at what we'd rather avoid. It means recognizing that life doesn't change without our participation. God can offer you light, but you have to flip the switch. Grace arrives, but the one who opens the door is you. You can't change what has already happened. You can't rewrite the scene or unsay the words, but you can decide what you'll do with it now. You can choose to forgive, to start over, or simply move forward with greater awareness. The pain of the past doesn't have to dictate your present path. Every choice made in faith is a step toward healing. Grace is like sunlight. It's always there, but you're the one who chooses to open the window. Don't wait for another stumble to finally awaken. Awareness is a gift that grows with practice. Start today with a gesture, with a sincere prayer, with the courage to choose a new way. Because when grace finds room, even wounds can bloom into flowers. Spiritual life doesn't pull us away from responsibility. It brings us closer to it, with more compassion and awareness. God's grace isn't a shortcut to escape consequences. It's a bridge that helps us cross them with wisdom. And once you understand that, you begin making choices not out of fear, but out of love. Love for who you're becoming. Love for a God who doesn't control, but walks beside you. Maybe it still hurts. Maybe some wounds will take time to heal. But you no longer have to walk in the dark. Now you know there is a light guiding you. But you are the one who must walk toward it. You have the right to change, to start again, to stop repeating the same mistakes. And God, in all His patience, still waits at the door, waiting for you to open it from within. So I ask you, what will you do with everything you heard here today? Will you let the reflection fade, or will you let it transform your next choice? Grace is already moving, and when it finds a willing heart, it makes its home there. If you felt that these words were meant for you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, your soul will always have a place to rest and reflect. With love, and may God bless you.